President Obama is set to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today at the White House, one day after Obama became the first U.S. president to explicitly call for Israelis and Palestinians to seek a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders. Obama made the remark during a major speech at the State Department on the recent uprisings in the Middle East and North Africa.
Ultimately, it is up to the Israelis and Palestinians to take action. No peace can be imposed upon them, not by the United States, not by anybody else. But endless delay won't make the problem go away. What America and the international community can do is to state frankly what everyone knows. A lasting peace will involve two states for two peoples. Israel as a Jewish state and the homeland for the Jewish people, and the state of Palestine as the homeland for the Palestinian people, each state enjoying self-determination, mutual recognition, and peace. So while the core issues of the conflict must be negotiated, the basis of those negotiations is clear: a viable Palestine, a secure Israel. The United States believes that negotiations should result in two states with permanent Palestinian borders with Israel, Jordan, and Egypt, and permanent Israeli borders with Palestine. We believe the borders of Israel and Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps, so that secure and recognized borders are established for both states. The Palestinian people must have the right to govern themselves and reach their full potential in a sovereign and contiguous state. As for security, every state has the right to self-defense, and Israel must be able to defend itself, by itself, against any threat. Provisions must also be robust enough to prevent a resurgence of terrorism, to stop the infiltration of weapons, and to provide effective border security. The full and phased withdrawal of Israeli military forces should be coordinated with the assumption of Palestinian security responsibility in a sovereign, non-militarized state. And the duration of this transition period must be agreed, and the effectiveness of security arrangements must be demonstrated.
President Obama's decision to put the United States formally on record as supporting the 1967 borders drew cautious support from Saeb Erakat, the top aide to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
President Abbas expresses his appreciation to the efforts being exerted, the continuous efforts being exerted by President Obama with the objective of resuming the permanent status talks in the hope of reaching a final status agreement in all core issues, including Jerusalem and refugees.
But Obama's comments drew sharp criticism from Israel.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his visit in Washington, will hope to hear a reaffirmation of the commitments made by the U.S. to Israel in 2004, and which were overwhelmingly supported by both houses of Congress. These commitments refer to the absolute necessity to solve the Palestinian refugee problems exclusively within the borders of the future Palestinian state, and the non-viability of the 67 borders as such.
That was Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesperson Yigal Palmor. In a speech, Obama also laid out a U.S. strategy toward the Middle East and North Africa. He unveiled new billion-dollar economic aid packages for Egypt and Tunisia and took a harder line against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Obama also voiced support for opposition leaders in Bahrain while reaffirming the U.S.'s commitment to Bahrain's security. The president denounced Iran's nuclear program and accused it of sponsoring terror. Obama did not once mention Saudi Arabia during his speech. The country is a major U.S. ally in the Middle East. It staved off the widespread popular protests that have swept across the region since January.
Well, to further discuss Obama's speech, we're joined by three guests. Noura Erakat is a Palestinian human rights attorney and activist. She's a professor of international human rights law in the Middle East at Georgetown University and the legal advocacy coordinator for the Badil Center for Palestinian Refugees and Residency Rights. She's speaking at the Move Over AIPAC conference in Washington this weekend. We're also joined by Norman Finkelstein, author of several books on the Israel-Palestine conflict, including This Time We Went Too Far: Truth and Consequences of the Gaza Invasion.
And in Washington, D.C., we're joined by Jeremy Ben-Ami, founder and president of J Street, a nonprofit advocacy group based in the United States that lobbies for a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Jeremy, let's begin with you. Your reaction to President Obama's address.
Good morning, Amy and Juan. It was a terrific speech by the president, and as you've pointed out, it broke new ground in putting the United States officially on record as recognizing that the resolution of this conflict for the benefit of both the Israeli and the Palestinian people is going to be two states based on the 67 lines with adjustments. It's something that 99% of the world understands and accepts and has recognized for quite some time, and it's really unfortunate to see the Israeli government reacting in this way and unable to accept that this is the basis of their own long-term security interest, recognizing their own borders with their neighbors and finally getting international recognition of their right to self-defense.
Norman Finkelstein, I'd like to ask you about this question of new ground. As you pointed out, President Bush, over 3 years ago, it made a similar speech, and I want to quote from his. He said that there should be an end to the occupation that began in 1967. The agreement must establish Palestine as a homeland for the Palestinian people, just as Israel is a homeland for the Jewish people. And Bush went on to say these negotiations must ensure that Israel has secure, recognized, and defensible borders, and they must ensure that the state of Palestine is viable, contiguous, sovereign, and independent. And it is vital that each side understand that satisfying the other's fundamental objectives is a key to a successful agreement. Bush said that you needed security for Israel and viability for the Palestinian state that are in the mutual interest of both parties. How different is what Bush said 3 years ago from what Obama said yesterday?
Well, if you were to juxtapose the two speeches, you would see not only is there no difference in content, but there's actually no difference in form. It's the same wording, mutually agreed land swaps based on the June 1967 borders. That's basically been the position of the United States since, you could say, the last 20 or 25 years. There was no new ground in President Obama's speech. And frankly, there's no recipe there, there's no formula there for resolving the conflict. The formula has to be exactly as the International Court of Justice said in July 2004, and as the UN General Assembly says every year with near unanimous support. The Palestinians have the right to self-determination in the whole of the West Bank, the whole of Gaza, with East Jerusalem, the whole of East Jerusalem as its capital. That's the Palestinian right. That's not subject to negotiations. Rights are enforced. They are not negotiated. The moment you say it has to be mutually agreed upon, it means Israel has a veto over Palestinian rights. Secondly, Mr. Obama said that the withdrawal of Israeli troops has to be mutually agreed upon. That means Israel can say that, okay, we'll withdraw from the Jordan Valley, as they've said in the past. We'll withdraw in 20 years. And if the Palestinians say no, we're at an impasse again. It's not mutually agreed upon. Thirdly, President Obama said that Jerusalem is a separate issue. He calls it an issue that remains. But that's not the law. The International Court of Justice ruled that the whole of the West Bank, as they put it, including Arab Jerusalem, is occupied Palestinian territory. If you say you want to return to the June 67 border, how can you exclude Jerusalem? Jerusalem wasn't part of Israel in June 1967. Jerusalem has the exact same status under international law as the West Bank and Gaza. In the words of the International Court, that it is occupied Palestinian territory. To talk about a Palestinian state without East Jerusalem is to talk about an Indian reservation or a Bantustan. There can't be a state without Jerusalem as its capital.
Noura Erakat, did you have any hope, draw any hope from what President Obama said yesterday? Did you think there was anything new in it?
I thought that his affirmation of self-determination for all peoples, the right to dignity, as they apply in Tunis, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Bahrain, was inspirational. I think that what he said in regards to Palestine and Israel, unfortunately, was more of the same and perhaps even worse. He had indicated that there are numerous Palestinians living to the west of the Jordan River. Well, those happen to be the Palestinians, the indigenous population that have been living under occupation since '67, including the refugees who were displaced in 1948. Additionally, the things that were also of concern is that he described moving to the 1967 borders and qualified that immediately by referencing land swaps. But if we're referencing land swaps, essentially what we're discussing is the potential transfer of the Palestinian citizens of Israel into the West Bank, and that transfer is forbidden, or is prohibited by international law. Finally, he did say, whereas Bush described Israel as a Jewish homeland, Obama went one step further to describe it as a Jewish state, which hasn't been discussed by Bush before. And this is very troubling because to describe it as a Jewish state, not a Jewish homeland, is detrimental to those 1.2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel who are Christian and Muslim, who therefore will be relegated to second-class citizenship as a matter of fact and institutionalization.
And the need that the president felt, Noura, to make this speech just before the meeting with Netanyahu, is that in essence reflecting the changed condition on the ground that's going on now? Obviously, with the revolution in Egypt, now you've had Egypt brokering an agreement between Fatah and Hamas, and Egypt agreeing to open up Rafah now to end the isolation of Gaza.
I think that by Obama making this speech, when he made it, he is trying to be ahead of the curve in order to demonstrate to the Palestinians that they need not move to diplomatic fora and multilateral institutions like the UN to achieve self-determination, that the U.S. can deliver. Unfortunately, the U.S. has been unable to deliver for the past 18 years, definitely more, but at least during the tenure of Oslo, and this does very little to increase their credibility.
Jeremy Ben-Ami, this weekend AIPAC is having its major meeting in Washington, and there is major counter meetings that are taking place. Explain what your organization, J Street, is.
We are the voice of what I would consider to be the passionate moderates in the American Jewish community, because we are deep believers in the concept of a national home for the Jewish people, and we are also passionate believers in the concept of a national home for the Palestinian people, and we believe that each is dependent on the other. We can only have a state that is, in fact, the home of the Jewish people if there is one for the Palestinian people as well. And contrary to Professor Finkelstein, we would support reasonable compromises that would allow some of the built-up settlement areas along the border of Israel to be retained within a state of Israel that is at peace with the Palestinian state, provided that equal land has been transferred from the state of Israel to the new Palestinian state. And again, for Noura Erakat, no one is talking about, at least in the pro-peace camp, is talking about swaps that would include actual citizens of Israel. It wouldn't include people, it would be land, and there's been land identified that is available. It's been subject to negotiation for a decade now that would be available for such a swap. So I like to think that we represent the center of the debate between those who see Israel as always right and those who see Israel as always wrong. We recognize there's two sides to the story, and there's two peoples with two rights and two sets of wrongs as well.
We're going to come back to this discussion. We have to break. Our guests are Jeremy Ben-Ami, president of J Street, Norman Finkelstein, author, Noura Erakat, human rights attorney and activist. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.